The bullet that grazed Hannah Jensen's shoulder as she hung wet linens on the line behind the boarding house wasn't meant for her, but it changed everything nonetheless. She dropped to the dusty ground of Carlin, Nevada, pressing her hand against the burning wound as shouts and gunfire echoed from the main street. It was July 1878, and violence had become as common as tumbleweeds in this railway town. But Hannah had never been caught in the crossfire before. The white sheet she'd been hanging fluttered down on top of her, and she lay there trembling, waiting for the shooting to stop, her fingers growing sticky with blood. When silence finally fell, footsteps approached quickly. Hannah tried to scramble backward, but strong hands caught her shoulders. "Easy there, miss. Let me see that wound." The voice was deep and calm, and when Hannah looked up through her tangle of dark hair, she saw a man with weather-beaten features and steady green eyes kneeling beside her. He was tall, even crouched down, with sandy brown hair that needed cutting and the lean, muscled build of someone who spent his days in the saddle. Dust covered his worn denim trousers and leather vest, and a cattleman's hat hung down his back on a cord. "I'm fine," Hannah said automatically, though her shoulder throbbed and her vision swam. "You're bleeding through your dress, and that's not fine where I come from." He pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket and pressed it gently against her shoulder. "Name's Grant Dawson. I own a ranch about 8 miles north of here." "Hannah Jensen," she managed, wincing as he applied pressure. "I work here at the boarding house, laundry mostly." Grant's jaw tightened as he examined the wound. "Bullet just grazed you, but it needs proper cleaning and bandaging. Can you stand?" Before Hannah could answer, Mrs. Pritchard, the boarding house owner, came rushing around the corner, her face red with exertion. "What happened?" "I heard shots and then someone said you were hit, Hannah." "She needs a doctor," Grant said, rising to his feet and helping Hannah up with surprising gentleness. "That fight on Main Street got out of hand. 2 minors arguing over a claim." "Doctor's office is 3 blocks down," Mrs. Pritchard said, wringing her hands. "I can't leave the house right now. I've got bread in the oven and Mrs. Henderson's expecting her clean linens within the hour." Hannah felt Grant stiffen beside her. She knew what was coming. Mrs. Pritchard was a good employer by Carlin's standards, which meant she provided a room in the attic and 2 meals a day in exchange for 14 hours of backbreaking work. But compassion didn't extend to lost profits. "I'll take her," Grant said flatly. "My horse is right out front." Mrs. Pritchard's eyes narrowed. "She's got work to finish. Those sheets need hanging and there's a whole basket of ironing waiting." "She's been shot," Grant said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "The sheets can wait." Hannah swayed on her feet, and that seemed to decide it. Grant swept her up into his arms before she could protest, ignoring Mrs. Pritchard's sputtering objections. Hannah wanted to argue, to say she could walk, but the world was tilting strangely, and her shoulder felt like someone had pressed a hot brand against it. Grant's horse was a sturdy bay gelding that stood patiently while he mounted with Hannah cradled against his chest. She'd never been this close to a man before, and under different circumstances, she might have been mortified. But pain and shock made her lean into his warmth as they rode down Carlin's dusty Main Street. Dr. Morrison's office was above the general store, and Grant carried Hannah up the narrow stairs like she weighed nothing at all. The doctor, a grizzled man with spectacles and kind eyes, took one look at her and gestured to the examination table. "Another casualty from that fool fight," Dr. Morrison muttered. "Set her down here, Grant. I'll need you to wait outside." "I'll stay," Grant said firmly, though he did set Hannah down carefully on the table. Dr. Morrison glanced at Hannah, who nodded slightly. She didn't know this cowboy, but something about his solid presence made her feel safer than she had in months. The wound was indeed just a graze. though it bled impressively and hurt like the devil. Dr. Morrison cleaned it with sharp-smelling carbolic solution that made Hannah bite her lip to keep from crying out, then bandaged it neatly. "You're lucky," the doctor said. "Another inch to the right and we'd be having a very different conversation. Keep this clean and dry. Change the bandage daily. Come back in a week so I can check for infection." Hannah nodded, though her mind was already calculating costs. Dr. Morrison was one of the more reasonable medical men in Carlin, but his services didn't come free. She'd have to work extra hours, assuming Mrs. Pritchard would even keep her on now that she was injured. As if reading her thoughts, Dr. Morrison said, "That'll be $2. Hannah's stomach dropped. $2 was more than she made in a week. "I don't have it right now, but I can pay you in installments. 50 cents a week, maybe. I'll cover it," Grant said, pulling coins from his pocket before Hannah could object. "No," Hannah said sharply, trying to sit up. "I don't take charity." Grant's eyes met hers, and something in them made her breath catch. "It's not charity. Consider it an investment. I came into town today looking for someone to help out at my ranch, and it seems like fate put you in my path." "I'm a laundress, not a ranch hand," Hannah said, though her heart was beating faster. "I need someone to cook and keep house," Grant explained. "My last housekeeper married a silver miner and moved to Virginia City 3 months ago. I've been making do, but burning more meals than I eat, and my cabin's starting to look like a pig pen. You'd have your own room, meals provided, and $20 a month plus room and board." Hannah stared at him. $20 a month was more than double what she made at the boarding house, and the promise of her own room instead of a shared attic crawl space seemed almost too good to be true, which meant it probably was. "Why would you offer that to a stranger?" she asked suspiciously. "You don't know anything about me. I know you tried to keep working after being shot because you need the money," Grant said quietly. "I know you've got pride enough to refuse help you can't pay back. And I know you're willing to negotiate a payment plan with the doctor rather than skip town on the debt, which tells me you're honest. That's more than I know about most folks in Carlin." Dr. Morrison cleared his throat. "For what it's worth, Miss Jensen, Grant Dawson is one of the most decent men in this territory. His ranch is modest but profitable, and he's known for treating his workers fairly. I've never heard a word against his character." Hannah looked between the two men, her mind racing. She'd come to Carlin 6 months ago after her father died, leaving her alone in the world at 22 with nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's old trunk. The boarding house job had been the best she could find, but it was slowly grinding her down. Every day was the same brutal routine of scrubbing, hauling water, heating irons, and trying to satisfy Mrs. Pritchard's impossible standards. She'd lost weight she couldn't afford to lose, and her hands were raw from lye soap. But going to live on a ranch with a strange man, no matter how decent Dr. Morrison claimed he was, seemed dangerous in a different way. "I'd need references," Hannah said finally, "and I'd want to see the ranch first before I commit to anything." Grant nodded, seeming to respect her caution. "Fair enough. Doc Morrison can vouch for me, and so can Pastor Hendricks at the Methodist Church. Sheriff Coleman knows me too. As for seeing the ranch, I'm heading back there now. You're welcome to ride out with me, look things over, and I'll bring you back to town before dark if you decide it's not suitable." Hannah hesitated. The sensible thing would be to thank him politely and return to the boarding house. But when she thought about going back to that attic room to Mrs. Pritchard's sharp voice and endless piles of dirty linens, something in her chest tightened painfully. "All right," she heard herself say. "I'll come look at your ranch." Grant's whole face changed when he smiled, becoming younger and somehow more approachable. "Good. Do you need to collect anything from the boarding house first?" Hannah thought of her meager possessions, all of which fit easily in her mother's trunk. I should let Mrs. Pritchard know I'm leaving for the afternoon at least. I'll take you there now, Mrs. Pritchard was not pleased when Hannah and Grant returned to the boarding house. She stood in the kitchen with her arms crossed, surveying Hannah's bandaged shoulder with disapproval. "Doctor says you need to keep that dry," Mrs. Pritchard said. "Can't do laundry with a bad shoulder, can you? And I can't afford to keep on workers who can't work." Hannah felt the words like a physical blow. She'd expected this, but it still hurt. "I could do other things. Mending, cooking, cleaning the rooms. Got other girls for that, and they've got 2 good shoulders." Mrs. Pritchard's expression wasn't cruel, just practical. "I'll give you until tomorrow to find other arrangements. You can stay tonight in your usual spot." "That won't be necessary," Grant said, his voice hard. "Miss Jensen is coming to work at my ranch. She'll need to collect her belongings now." Mrs. Pritchard's eyebrows shot up. "Is that so? Moving mighty fast, aren't you?" Hannah felt her cheeks burn, understanding the implication. "It's a housekeeping position, Mrs. Pritchard. Nothing improper." The older woman sniffed. "Well, it's your choice to make. You're of age and free to do as you please. But don't come back here when things don't work out." Hannah climbed the narrow stairs to the attic one last time, her shoulder aching with each step. The room she'd shared with 2 other laundry girls was stifling in the July heat, with 3 narrow cots crammed under the sloped ceiling. Her trunk sat at the foot of her bed, containing everything she owned: 3 dresses, 2 nightgowns, some undergarments, her mother's Bible and jewelry box, and a daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day. She was latching the trunk when one of the other girls, a young woman named Sophie, came in from hanging laundry. "Hannah, I heard you got shot. Are you all right?" "Just a graze," Hannah assured her, touched by the genuine concern in Sophie's voice. "But Mrs. Pritchard let me go." "That old witch," Sophie said without heat. "What will you do?" Hannah gestured to the trunk. "A rancher offered me a housekeeping job. Better pay, my own room." Sophie's eyes widened. "You're going to live alone with a man, Hannah, that's dangerous. What if he's not what he seems?" "I don't have much choice," Hannah admitted. "And Dr. Morrison vouched for him. I'll be careful." Sophie helped her carry the trunk downstairs, where Grant was waiting by his horse. He lifted the trunk like it weighed nothing and secured it behind his saddle with practiced efficiency. "Ready?" he asked Hannah. She took a last look at the boarding house, at the yard full of drying laundry and the windows that reflected the harsh afternoon sun. 6 months of her life spent in that building, working until her back ached and her fingers bled. The thought of never having to scrub another man's shirt or heat another iron made her decision feel almost easy. "Ready," she said. Grant helped her mount in front of him, careful of her injured shoulder, and they rode north out of Carlin. Hannah had rarely left the town limits since arriving in Nevada, and she watched with interest as the rough buildings gave way to open rangeland dotted with sagebrush and juniper. The Humboldt River glinted in the distance, and mountains rose purple and dramatic against the bright blue sky. "It's beautiful," she said without thinking. "It is," Grant agreed, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Took me years to appreciate it. I'm from Missouri originally. Came west after the war looking for something different. The war." Hannah did quick mental math. Grant looked to be in his late 20s, which would have made him the right age to fight. "Yes, madam. Enlisted when I was 17, though I lied and said I was 18. Came home when I was 21 and found my family's farm sold for taxes. Seemed like as good a time as any to start over somewhere new." Hannah heard the old pain in his voice and recognized it. "My family came to California during the gold rush," she offered. "My father thought he'd strike it rich. Instead, he spent 20 years working other men's claims for day wages." We moved around a lot. He died last winter in a mining accident near Carson City." "I'm sorry," Grant said, and the simple sincerity in his voice made her throat tighten. "He was a good man, just unlucky. My mother died when I was 16. After my father passed, I had nothing keeping me in Carson City, so I came to Carlin. The boarding house was hiring, and I needed work." They rode in comfortable silence for a while. Hannah found herself relaxing against Grant's chest, lulled by the rhythm of the horse's gait and the warm afternoon sun. Her shoulder still hurt, but the pain was dulling to a persistent ache. "There," Grant said, pointing ahead. "That's the Dawson Ranch." Hannah straightened, looking at the property spread before them. The ranch wasn't grand, but it was neat and well-maintained. A sturdy cabin built of logs and stone sat in a small clearing, with a barn, a corral, and several outbuildings nearby. Cattle grazed on the hillsides beyond, and she could hear chickens clucking somewhere out of sight. A vegetable garden grew beside the cabin, though it looked somewhat neglected, and there was even a small grove of cottonwood trees that would provide shade in summer. "It's not fancy," Grant said, sounding almost apologetic, "but it's all paid for and it's mine." "It's wonderful," Hannah said honestly. After months in the cramped, dirty boarding house, the ranch looked like paradise. Grant dismounted and helped Hannah down, then led his horse to the barn. A young man emerged from the building, lanky and sunburned, probably no more than 19. "Boss, you're back early," the young man said, then noticed Hannah and swept off his hat. "Madam." "This is Tommy Fletcher," Grant introduced them. "He helps with the cattle and horses." "Tommy, this is Miss Hannah Jensen. She's going to be our new housekeeper." Tommy's face lit up. "Does that mean we'll get decent food again? No offense, boss, but your cooking could kill a man," Grant laughed. "None taken. Show Miss Jensen the same respect you'd show your own mother, understand?" "Yes, sir," Tommy said seriously, then grinned at Hannah. "Welcome to the ranch, Miss Jensen. You're going to have your work cut out for you getting the house in order." Grant led Hannah to the cabin and pushed open the door. The interior was dim and cooler than outside, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, and 2 doors leading to what she assumed were bedrooms. The furniture was simple but well made. A table with 4 chairs, a rocking chair by the stone fireplace, shelves holding dishes and supplies. But Tommy hadn't been exaggerating about the state of things. Dirty dishes were piled in a wash basin, dust covered most surfaces, and the floor needed sweeping badly. "The bedroom on the right would be yours," Grant said. "It's small, but there's a real bed and a window. My room's on the left." Hannah opened the door to what would be her room and felt her eyes sting with sudden tears. It was small, yes, but compared to the attic at the boarding house, it was luxurious. A real bed with a quilt, a chest of drawers, a small table with a basin and pitcher, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. Curtains hung at the window, faded but clean. "This was my housekeeper's room before," Grant said quietly. "Mrs. Chen was with me for 2 years. She kept this place running like clockwork." Hannah turned to face him. "Why did you really offer me this job, Mr. Dawson? You could have put a notice in the newspaper or asked around town. Instead, you offered it to someone you'd just met, someone who was injured." Grant met her eyes steadily. "Because in the 5 minutes I knew you, I saw more courage and dignity than I've seen in most people in a month. Because you reminded me that there are still good, honest folks in this world trying to make their way as best they can. And because I know what it's like to be alone and struggling, and I figure if I can help someone the way I wish someone had helped me, then that's reason enough." Hannah studied his face, looking for deception or hidden motives, but found only sincerity. She'd been taught to be cautious around men, especially in rough towns like Carlin, where women without protection were vulnerable. But every instinct she had said Grant Dawson was exactly what he appeared to be, a decent man offering her a chance at something better. "All right," she said. "I'll take the job, but I want to be clear on the terms. I'll cook, clean, do laundry, and maintain the household. I'll work 6 days a week, with Sundays free to attend church if I choose. My room is my private space, and you'll knock before entering. And if at any time I feel unsafe or uncomfortable, I can leave with 2 weeks' wages and no questions asked." Grant extended his hand. "That's more than fair. And I'll add that you're free to leave even without those 2 weeks if you feel you need to. I won't keep anyone here who doesn't want to stay." They shook hands, and Hannah felt a strange flutter in her chest at the touch of his calloused palm against hers. She told herself it was just relief at securing better employment, nothing more. "When would you like me to start?" she asked. Grant looked around at the messy cabin and gave her a rueful smile. "How about tomorrow? You should rest today and let that shoulder heal. I'll take you back to town to collect the rest of your things if you need anything else." "Everything I own is in that trunk," Hannah admitted. "But I should let Mrs. Pritchard know officially that I won't be returning." "We can do that. And maybe stop by the general store so you can pick up any supplies you think you'll need for cooking and housekeeping. Consider it part of your employment package." Over the next hour, Grant showed Hannah around the property. The barn housed 3 horses besides his bay gelding, a gentle mare he said Hannah could ride if she needed to go to town, and 2 working horses for moving cattle. The chickens lived in a neat coop and provided fresh eggs daily. The garden, as she'd suspected, was struggling from neglect, but Grant said she was welcome to tend it and use whatever it produced. "Mrs. Chen used to make the best vegetable stew," Grant said wistfully as they walked through the rows of beans and squash. "I've tried to keep it watered, but I don't have her touch." Tommy joined them for the tour of the outer buildings, and Hannah learned that the young ranch hand lived in a small bunkhouse behind the barn. He was enthusiastic and friendly, treating Hannah with respectful courtesy that put her at ease. As the afternoon wore on toward evening, Grant saddled up his horse again. "We should head back to town before it gets dark. I want to make sure Mrs. Pritchard knows you're properly employed and not just running off." The ride back to Carlin was pleasant, with the worst heat of the day fading into comfortable warmth. Grant pointed out landmarks and told her stories about the area, which creek had the best fishing, where wildcats sometimes prowled, how the winter snows could make the road impassable for days at a time. At the boarding house, Mrs. Pritchard accepted Hannah's resignation with tight-lipped disapproval, but provided a short reference letter at Grant's insistence. Then they went to the general store, where Grant told Hannah to select whatever she needed. "I don't want to take advantage," Hannah protested. "You're not. A good housekeeper needs proper tools and supplies. Consider it an investment in the ranch's well-being." Hannah selected modestly: a new apron, some dish towels, coffee, flour, salt, sugar, bacon, and dried beans. She added a few packets of seeds for the garden and some basic medicines for the household supply. Grant paid without comment and arranged to have the goods delivered to the ranch the next day. Their last stop was at Dr. Morrison's office, where the doctor checked Hannah's bandage and declared himself satisfied with her progress. "Keep it clean and dry," he repeated. "Come back in a week. And Grant, make sure she doesn't overdo it. That shoulder needs time to heal properly." "I'll make sure she rests," Grant promised. Night was falling as they rode back out to the ranch. Hannah felt exhaustion settling into her bones, the day's events catching up with her. She drowsed against Grant's chest, trusting him to keep her safe in the saddle. At the ranch, Grant helped her down and carried her trunk into her new room. "You should get some rest," he said. "I'll make us some supper." "You're injured and you've had a long day," Grant said firmly. "Tomorrow you can start earning your wages. Tonight you're my guest." Hannah was too tired to argue. She washed her face and hands in the basin, changed carefully into her nightgown, and lay down on the real bed with its soft quilt. Through the door, she could hear Grant moving around the kitchen, the clatter of dishes and the smell of something cooking. It wasn't the boarding house attic with its stifling heat and sounds of other girls tossing restlessly. It wasn't her father's succession of rented rooms in mining camps. It was something new, something that felt almost like a home. She fell asleep before Grant could call her for supper. When Hannah woke, morning light was streaming through her window and she could hear roosters crowing. She sat up carefully, testing her shoulder. It was stiff and sore, but the sharp pain from yesterday had faded to a manageable ache. Someone had left a tray on her bedside table, a plate with cold bacon and biscuits and a cup of water. She must have slept right through the evening and night. After eating and dressing, Hannah ventured into the main room. It was empty, but the dishes from last night's supper had been washed and put away, and there was fresh coffee warming on the stove. A note on the table read, "Out checking fences with Tommy. Back by noon. Don't overdo it. Grant." Hannah smiled at the neat handwriting and looked around the cabin with a housekeeper's eye. It needed work, certainly, but it was fundamentally sound. She started with the dishes, heating water and washing everything she could find. Then she swept the floors, beating dust out the door and feeling satisfied as the rough wood planks emerged cleaner from beneath months of accumulated dirt. She was scrubbing the table when Grant and Tommy returned, both men dusty and tired-looking. "Fence is fixed," Tommy announced, then stopped and stared around the cabin. "Holy Moses, you can actually see the floor." Grant's eyes found Hannah and something warm flickered in them. "You should be resting that shoulder." "It feels better when I'm moving," Hannah said, which was partly true. "And I couldn't just sit idle when there's work to be done. Are you hungry? I can make lunch." Over the next few weeks, Hannah settled into a routine at the ranch. She rose early to collect eggs and start breakfast, usually biscuits or pancakes with bacon or salt pork. Grant and Tommy would eat quickly and head out to work the cattle or mend fences or complete the 100 other tasks that kept a ranch running. Hannah would spend her mornings cleaning, doing laundry in the big tub behind the cabin, and tending the garden. Afternoons were for cooking supper and any mending or special projects that needed doing. Her shoulder healed cleanly. And when she returned to Dr. Morrison after a week, he pronounced her recovered and charged her nothing for the visit. "Grant already paid me extra to cover any follow-up care," the doctor explained when Hannah protested. "He's a good man. You landed in a good situation, Miss Jensen." Hannah was beginning to believe that herself. Grant was unfailingly courteous and respectful, always knocking before entering any room she might be in, always asking rather than demanding. He seemed genuinely grateful for every meal she cooked and every improvement she made to the cabin. Tommy was like an enthusiastic younger brother, full of jokes and stories and appreciation for her cooking. But it was Grant who occupied more and more of Hannah's thoughts as August gave way to September. She found herself watching for him to return from the range, listening for his voice and his footsteps. She took extra care with his meals, remembering that he preferred his coffee strong and his eggs over easy. When he came in tired and dusty, she made sure there was hot water for washing and a clean shirt waiting. And Grant seemed to watch her too. She'd catch him looking at her over supper or standing in the doorway while she worked in the garden. Their conversations grew longer, moving beyond simple household matters to deeper topics. He told her about his childhood in Missouri, about losing his parents to cholera and his brother in the war. She told him about following her father from camp to camp, about learning to read from her mother's Bible and dreaming of a settled life. One evening in late September, Hannah was preparing supper when she realized they were out of flour. She'd been meaning to make biscuits, but the bin was empty. "I can ride into town tomorrow and get supplies," Grant offered when she mentioned it. "I could go myself," Hannah said. "I've been here 6 weeks and haven't left the ranch once. A trip to town might be nice." Grant hesitated. Carlin can be rough, especially for a woman alone. "I'll go with her," Tommy volunteered. "I need to pick up some tobacco anyway, and my ma asked me to mail a letter." Grant still looked uncertain, but he nodded. "All right. Take the wagon and stick together. Be back before dark." The next morning, Hannah dressed in her best day dress and let Tommy help her into the wagon seat. It felt strange to be leaving the ranch, and stranger still to realize she was reluctant to go. The place had become home in a way she hadn't expected. Carlin looked exactly as she remembered, dusty, rough, and bustling with activity. The railway had brought more growth to the town, and there seemed to be new buildings going up on every corner. Hannah and Tommy went to the general store first, where Hannah selected flour, sugar, coffee, and other staples. While the storekeeper tallied up the bill, a familiar voice made her turn. "Well, if it isn't Hannah Jensen. I heard you'd run off to shack up with some rancher, Mrs." Pritchard stood behind her, along with 2 women Hannah didn't recognize. The boarding house owner's face was tight with disapproval. "I'm working as Mr. Dawson's housekeeper," Hannah said evenly. "It's a respectable position." "Is that what they're calling it now?" one of the other women said with a snicker. "Living alone with a man out in the middle of nowhere. We all know what that means." Hannah felt her face burn. "It means I have honest work and fair wages, which is more than I had at the boarding house." "You're ruining your reputation, Mrs." Pritchard said. "No decent man will marry you now, not after living in sin with Grant Dawson." "I'm not living in sin with anyone," Hannah said, her voice shaking with anger. "And my reputation is my own business." Tommy stepped forward, his young face set in hard lines. "That's enough. Miss Jensen is a lady and you'll treat her with respect." "Oh, the ranch hand is defending her honor," the second woman said mockingly. "How touching." Hannah grabbed Tommy's arm before he could say something he'd regret. "Come on, Tommy, we have supplies to load." They left the store in tense silence, and Tommy helped Hannah load the wagon with jerky movements that betrayed his anger. "Don't listen to them old biddies," he said fiercely. "They're just jealous because you got out of that miserable boarding house and found something better." Hannah blinked back tears. "Do people really think I'm Grant's mistress?" Tommy's ears turned red. "Some might gossip, but anyone who knows the boss knows he'd never dishonor a woman like that. He's the most upstanding man in this territory." Hannah wanted to believe him, but Mrs. Pritchard's words had struck a nerve. She'd been so focused on the practical benefits of her job at the ranch that she hadn't considered how it might look to outsiders. A young, unmarried woman living alone with a single man, no matter how proper their actual arrangement, was bound to cause talk. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Hannah's mind churned with worry. What if the gossip got back to Grant? What if it damaged his reputation or caused him problems in town? What if she'd been naive to think she could have this job without consequences? When they arrived at the ranch, Grant was working in the corral with one of the horses. He looked up and waved, then his expression changed as he took in Hannah's troubled face. "What happened?" he asked, striding over to the wagon. Tommy glanced at Hannah, who shook her head slightly. "Nothing important, just some gossip in town." Grant's jaw tightened. "What kind of gossip?" "The kind that happens when a woman lives in a house with a man she's not married to," Hannah said quietly. Mrs. Pritchard and some other women made it clear they think I'm ruining my reputation." Grant's face darkened with anger. "That's ridiculous. Anyone with eyes can see you're a respectable woman working an honest job." "But they don't have eyes, do they?" Hannah said. "They see what they want to see and they talk. I don't want to cause problems for you, Grant. If this situation is damaging your reputation in town, maybe I should find other employment." "No," Grant said sharply. Then, more gently, "No, Hannah. You're the best thing that's happened to this ranch in years. The house has never been cleaner, the meals have never been better, and I actually look forward to coming home at the end of the day instead of dreading another burned stew and a messy cabin. I don't give a damn what the gossips say." "But I do," Hannah said. "I've worked hard to maintain my respectability and now people are saying I'm your mistress. That's not fair to either of us." Grant was silent for a long moment, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. Then he looked directly at her, his green eyes intense. "There's one way to stop the gossip permanently," he said. Hannah's heart began to pound. "What do you mean, marry me?" Grant said. "Make it real and legal and respectable. Give those busybodies nothing to talk about." Hannah stared at him, her mind reeling. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious." Grant took a step closer. "I know this is sudden, and I know we've only known each other a few weeks, but I've come to care for you, Hannah. More than I should, probably. You've brought life back to this place and to me. I enjoy our conversations over supper. I like seeing your clothes hanging on the line and smelling your cooking when I come in from the range. I like the sound of your voice and the way you hum when you work in the garden. I think we could make a good life together." "You're proposing a marriage of convenience to save my reputation," Hannah said, trying to keep her voice steady even as her heart hammered in her chest. "I'm proposing a real marriage," Grant corrected. "I won't lie to you, Hannah. Part of it is practical. You need security and respectability. I need a wife and partner to share the work of the ranch. But it's more than that. I've been alone for a long time and I'm tired of it. I want someone to share my life with, someone I respect and admire. I think you could be that person, if you'd be willing to take a chance on me." Hannah realized she was trembling. 6 weeks ago, she'd been a laundress in a boarding house, barely surviving. Now a good man was offering her not just a home, but a real partnership, a future. "I care for you too," she admitted. "More than I should, maybe, but Grant, marriage is forever. We can't rush into it just because of some gossip." "Then don't think of it as rushing," Grant said. "Think of it as recognizing something that was already growing between us. Tell me honestly, Hannah, do you feel nothing when we sit together in the evenings? When our hands touch passing dishes at supper? When you catch me looking at you and I catch you looking back?" Hannah felt her cheeks warm because he was right. She'd been trying to ignore the growing attraction between them, telling herself it was inappropriate and impossible. But the truth was that she'd started to fall for Grant Dawson almost from the moment he'd knelt beside her in the dust and pressed his handkerchief to her wounded shoulder. "I feel it," she whispered. "But what if we're making a mistake? What if this feeling is just proximity and gratitude and it fades once the novelty wears off?" Grant reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His touch was warm and calloused and gentle. "Life doesn't come with guarantees, Hannah, but I promise you this. I'll work every day to make you happy. I'll respect you and provide for you and never raise my hand to you. I'll listen when you talk and value your opinions, and I'll give you the home and security you deserve. That's the best I can offer." Hannah looked down at their joined hands, then up at Grant's earnest face. She thought about the alternative, leaving the ranch, finding another job in another town, always wondering what might have been. She thought about the morning's encounter with Mrs. Pritchard and realized that scandal would follow her wherever she went now. She was marked as Grant Dawson's housekeeper, his suspected mistress, and no amount of distance would erase that. But more than any of that, she thought about how Grant made her feel. Safe, valued, seen. She thought about his quiet kindness and his integrity, and the way he'd offered her a home when she had nothing. She thought about how her heart lifted every time he walked through the door, and how she'd begun to imagine a future here on this ranch in this life. "Yes," she said, "I'll marry you." Grant's face lit up with a smile that transformed him. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "You've made me very happy, Hannah. I promise you won't regret this." "When?" Hannah asked, feeling suddenly breathless. "As soon as possible," Grant said. "This Sunday, if Pastor Hendricks is available. Unless you want a big wedding with a fancy dress and lots of guests." Hannah thought of her mother's simple wedding as shown in the daguerreotype. "No, I'd like a quiet ceremony, just us and a few witnesses." Tommy emerged from the barn where he'd been tactfully giving them privacy. "Did I hear right? You two are getting hitched this Sunday if all goes well," Grant confirmed. Tommy let out a whoop and rushed over to shake Grant's hand and bow to Hannah. "Congratulations! This is wonderful news. The boss has been moping around here like a lost calf ever since Mrs. Chen left. Now he'll have a wife to keep him in line." The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Grant rode into town the following day and spoke with Pastor Hendricks, who agreed to perform the ceremony that Sunday afternoon. Word spread quickly through Carlin, and Hannah wondered what Mrs. Pritchard and her friends thought of the news. Hannah had no family to invite and few friends in the area, but Grant had several acquaintances he wanted present. Tommy would serve as best man, and Grant asked the wife of a neighboring rancher, Mrs. Sarah Winters, to stand with Hannah. On Saturday, Hannah tackled the most important task, altering her best dress for the wedding. It was a simple blue calico, the nicest thing she owned, and she added some white lace trim from her mother's sewing kit to make it more festive. She washed and ironed it carefully, then spent the evening pressing Grant's good suit and white shirt. Sunday morning dawned clear and warm, with autumn colors starting to show on the cottonwood trees. Hannah bathed carefully, mindful of her healing shoulder and dressed in her blue calico. She braided her dark hair and coiled it at the nape of her neck, then pinned on the small hat that had been her mother's. When she emerged from her room, Grant was waiting in the main room, dressed in his pressed suit. He looked different, cleaned up, more refined somehow, but still unmistakably himself. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. "You look very handsome," Hannah replied, and meant it. They rode into Carlin in the wagon, sitting side by side in comfortable silence. The Methodist church stood on a small rise at the edge of town, a simple white building with a steeple. Pastor Hendricks was waiting on the steps, along with Tommy, the Winters family, and a handful of other ranch folk who'd heard about the wedding. Mrs. Winters, a plump woman in her 40s with kind eyes, swept Hannah into a hug. "I'm so happy for you, dear. Grant is a good man, and you'll make him a wonderful wife." Inside the church, the ceremony was brief and simple. Hannah stood beside Grant before the altar, acutely aware of his height and warmth beside her. Pastor Hendricks spoke about the sanctity of marriage and the importance of partnership and mutual respect. "Do you, Grant Dawson, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Grant's voice was steady and sure. "I do." "And do you, Hannah Jensen, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Hannah took a breath and felt the weight of the moment. This was real. This was forever. She looked up at Grant and saw not just a good man offering her security, but someone she truly wanted to spend her life with. "I do," she said clearly. Grant slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. She hadn't known about the ring, and her eyes filled with tears at the sight of it. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Nevada and by God Almighty, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Grant, you may kiss your bride." Grant cupped Hannah's face in his hands, his touch gentle, and kissed her softly. It was her first real kiss, and it made her knees weak and her heart race. When they broke apart, Grant was smiling down at her with such warmth that Hannah felt her last doubts melt away. "Mrs. Dawson," he said softly, and the name sounded right. The small group of witnesses congratulated them warmly. Mrs. Winters had brought a cake she'd baked for the occasion, and they shared it on the church steps in the September sunshine. Several people from town came by to offer their congratulations, including, surprisingly, Dr. Morrison. "I had a feeling this would work out," the doctor said with a wink. "You two are well matched." Even the sheriff stopped by, a gruff man named Coleman who shook Grant's hand and nodded respectfully to Hannah. "Congratulations, Dawson. You got yourself a good woman." The only shadow on the day came when Hannah spotted Mrs. Pritchard watching from across the street, her face pinched with disapproval. But then Grant took Hannah's hand and led her back to the wagon, and she decided she didn't care what the old woman thought. The ride back to the ranch was different this time. They weren't employer and employee anymore, or even just friends. They were husband and wife, bound together by law and faith and growing affection. At the ranch, Tommy had decorated the porch with wildflowers and hung a "just married" sign he'd painstakingly painted. He'd also, Grant informed Hannah with some amusement, agreed to sleep in the barn for the night to give them privacy. "That wasn't necessary," Hannah said, blushing. "Sure it was," Tommy said cheerfully. "You're newlyweds. You deserve some time alone." After Tommy headed to the barn and the sun began to set, Hannah found herself alone with her husband in the cabin that was now truly her home. She'd moved her belongings into Grant's room the day before, and now she stood in the doorway of that room, suddenly nervous. Grant came up behind her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "We don't have to rush anything," he said quietly. "I know this is all very sudden and I want you to feel comfortable." Hannah turned to face him. "I'm nervous," she admitted, "but I'm also happy." "Is that strange?" "Not strange at all." Grant reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm nervous too. I want to be a good husband to you, Hannah. I want to make you happy." "You already do," Hannah said. "You gave me a home when I had nothing. You treated me with respect when others would have taken advantage. You offered me a future when I couldn't see past the next day. I think I started falling in love with you the day we met, even though I didn't recognize it then." Grant's eyes widened. "You love me." "I do," Hannah said, and realized it was true. "I love your kindness and your integrity. I love how gentle you are with the horses and how patient you are with Tommy. I love the way you look at me like I'm precious. Yes, Grant, I love you." Grant pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I love you too, Hannah. I think I have from the start. You're brave and strong and beautiful, and I thank God every day that I found you." He kissed her then, deeper and more passionate than the chaste kiss at their wedding, and Hannah kissed him back, pouring all her hope and trust and growing love into it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grant swept her into his arms and carried her over the threshold of their bedroom. The next morning, Hannah woke to find herself tucked against Grant's side, his arm around her shoulders. Sunlight streamed through the window, and she could hear chickens clucking and Tommy whistling as he worked in the barn. Everything looked the same as it had yesterday, but everything had changed. She was a wife now, truly part of this ranch and this life. Grant stirred beside her, his eyes opening. When he saw her watching him, he smiled. "Good morning, Mrs. Dawson." "Good morning, husband," Hannah replied, feeling shy and bold all at once. They lay there for a while, talking quietly about nothing important, just enjoying the newness of being together. Finally, the demands of the day pulled them from bed. Hannah dressed and went to start breakfast, feeling different in her own skin, more settled somehow. Tommy came in for breakfast with a knowing grin that made both Hannah and Grant blush, but he had the good sense not to tease too much. As they sat around the table eating pancakes and bacon, Hannah realized this was what she'd been searching for all her life without knowing it. A place to belong, people who cared about her, a home that was truly hers. The weeks after the wedding settled into a new pattern. Hannah continued her household duties, but now she also helped Grant with ranch decisions, discussing which cattle to sell and when to plant the winter wheat. Grant taught her to ride better, taking her out on the gentle mare to check fence lines and move cattle. They worked side by side in the garden, preparing it for winter. In the evenings, they'd sit by the fire, Hannah mending or knitting while Grant carved wooden utensils or worked on his account books. Sometimes they'd read aloud to each other from the few books in the house. Other times they'd just talk, sharing stories and dreams and gradually learning everything about each other. The physical side of their marriage grew naturally from their emotional connection. Grant was patient and tender, always making sure Hannah felt cherished and safe. She blossomed under his attention, growing more confident in herself and in their relationship. By October, Hannah realized she'd never been happier. The ranch was prospering, the cattle were healthy, and she and Grant were building a strong foundation for their future. Tommy had become like family, a younger brother who enlivened their household with his enthusiasm and jokes. One evening in late October, Hannah was feeling unwell. She'd been sick to her stomach in the mornings for the past week, and certain smells made her queasy. Grant had noticed her pushing food around her plate. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked with concern. "Should we have Dr. Morrison come out to check on you?" Hannah met his eyes and felt her heart flutter. She'd suspected for a few days now, but hadn't been certain. "I don't think that's necessary. I think I'm pregnant, Grant." Grant's fork clattered to his plate. "Pregnant, are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. All the signs are there." Grant was around the table in an instant, pulling her into his arms. "A baby. We're going to have a baby." His voice was thick with emotion, and Hannah felt tears spill down her own cheeks. "Are you happy?" "Happy. Hannah, I'm overjoyed. You've given me everything. A home, a partnership, love, and now a child. I'm the luckiest man alive." Tommy was equally excited when they told him the news. "A baby, that's wonderful. I'll teach him to ride and rope cattle and everything." "It might be a girl," Hannah pointed out with amusement. "Then I'll teach her to ride and rope cattle," Tommy said firmly. Girls should know how to handle themselves on a ranch. As winter approached, Grant became increasingly protective of Hannah. He insisted she not lift anything heavy or overwork herself. He took over more of the household chores, despite her protests that she was perfectly capable. "You're carrying our child," he said firmly. "I won't have you wearing yourself out." Dr. Morrison confirmed the pregnancy in November and estimated the baby would arrive in late May or early June. He pronounced Hannah healthy and gave her instructions for caring for herself through the pregnancy. Winter on the ranch was different from anything Hannah had experienced in mining camps. Instead of transient populations and rough conditions, she had a warm cabin, plenty of food, and a husband who doted on her. When snow fell in December, blanketing the landscape in white, Grant made sure the house was well stocked with firewood and supplies so they wouldn't need to venture out in bad weather. Christmas was simple but joyful. Hannah made a special dinner of roast chicken and pie, and Grant surprised her with a beautiful shawl he'd ordered from a catalog. She'd knitted him warm socks and made him a new shirt. Tommy received gloves and a scarf Hannah had knitted, and he gave them a carved wooden rattle for the baby that made Hannah cry with how thoughtful it was. As winter deepened into January and February, Hannah's pregnancy became more visible. She'd had to let out her dresses and wore loose aprons to accommodate her growing belly. Grant seemed fascinated by the changes in her body, often placing his hands on her stomach to feel the baby kick. "Strong little thing," he'd say with pride. "Takes after his mother." Or her father, Hannah would reply. They spent long winter evenings discussing names and making plans for the baby's arrival. Grant built a beautiful wooden cradle, sanding it smooth and finishing it with careful attention. Hannah sewed tiny gowns and blankets, her heart full of anticipation. Spring came slowly to Nevada, with the snows melting in March and the first green shoots appearing in April. Hannah felt huge and ungainly, her back aching and her ankles swelling. But Grant never made her feel anything but beautiful, telling her daily how radiant she looked. In early May, Hannah woke in the middle of the night with her first labor pains. Grant rode immediately for Dr. Morrison and Mrs. Winters, who'd agreed to help with the delivery. By the time they arrived, Hannah's contractions were coming regularly, and she was trying to be brave but couldn't help crying out with the pain. Grant stayed by her side through the whole ordeal, holding her hand and wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. Mrs. Winters and Dr. Morrison worked efficiently, encouraging Hannah and guiding her through the process. Finally, as dawn broke on May 15, 1879, Hannah gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Dr. Morrison placed the squalling infant in her arms, and Hannah looked down at the tiny red face in wonder. "He's perfect," she whispered. Grant was kneeling beside the bed, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his wife and son. "He's beautiful. You're amazing, Hannah. I love you so much." They named him James Henry Dawson after both their fathers. Jimmy, as they quickly started calling him, was a good baby, healthy and strong. Grant was a devoted father from the start, walking the floor with Jimmy when he cried at night and changing nappies without complaint. Tommy was equally smitten, declaring himself Uncle Tommy and spending all his free time making faces at the baby and trying to coax smiles from him. The next few years passed in a blur of joy and hard work. Jimmy grew into a toddler with his father's green eyes and his mother's dark hair. He was curious and energetic, following Grant around the ranch and getting into everything. In the spring of 1881, Hannah gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Mary Grace. She was smaller and quieter than Jimmy had been, with blonde hair like Grant's mother and blue eyes that gradually shifted to hazel. The ranch continued to prosper. Grant expanded their cattle operation and bought more land. He hired another ranch hand to help Tommy, a quiet man named Joe who proved to be a hard worker. The house grew too, with Grant adding on 2 more bedrooms to accommodate their growing family. Hannah had never imagined she could be so happy. Every morning she woke beside a man who loved her, in a home that was truly hers, with children who filled her days with laughter and purpose. The scared, exhausted laundress who'd been shot in a boarding house yard seemed like a different person from a different life. By 1883, when Jimmy was 4 and Mary was 2, Hannah discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the previous 2, and Dr. Morrison told her to rest as much as possible. Grant hired a woman from town to help with the housework and childcare, insisting Hannah focus on staying healthy. Their third child, another son they named Thomas after Tommy, was born in January 1884. He was a big baby, nearly 10 pounds, and the delivery was difficult. Dr. Morrison told Hannah afterward that she shouldn't have any more children, that another pregnancy could be dangerous for her. Hannah and Grant accepted this news with mixed feelings. They'd both hoped for a large family, but they had 3 beautiful, healthy children and each other. That was more than enough. Young Thomas, called Tom to distinguish him from Tommy the ranch hand, was a happy, placid baby who rarely cried. Jimmy adored his new brother and took his role as big brother very seriously, always wanting to help with the baby. Mary was less impressed, preferring to stick close to her mother and avoid the noisy boys. As the children grew, the ranch became a lively, joyful place. There was always noise and activity, from Jimmy and Mary running through the house to baby Tom's gurgles and cries. Grant and Hannah worked together to manage both the household and the ranch business, a true partnership in every sense. In the summer of 1885, when Hannah was 29 and Grant 31, they sat on the porch one evening after the children were asleep, watching the sun set over the mountains. "Do you ever think about that day we met?" Grant asked, his arm around Hannah's shoulders. "Often," Hannah admitted. "I was so scared and alone. If that bullet had been 2 inches to the right, I might have died in that dusty yard. But instead you lived. And you let a stranger take you to a doctor and then offer you a job. That took courage." Hannah laughed softly. "Or desperation. I didn't have many options." "I'm grateful you chose me," Grant said, pulling her closer. "These past 7 years with you have been the best of my life. Every day I wake up thankful that I rode into Carlin that particular afternoon, that I happened to be on Main Street when those miners started fighting, that I found you there in the yard." "It does seem like fate, doesn't it?" Hannah said. "Like everything in my life led to that moment, and everything after came from it." "You have any regrets?" Grant asked. Hannah thought about her life before the ranch, the constant moving, the poverty, the uncertainty. She thought about the exhausting work at the boarding house and Mrs. Pritchard's harsh voice. Then she looked at the home she and Grant had built together, the children sleeping inside, the life they'd created. "Not a single one," she said firmly. "This is everything I ever wanted and more than I dared to dream." "You gave me a home, Grant, but more than that, you gave me love and partnership and family. You saw me when I was at my lowest and offered me dignity and hope. How could I ever regret that?" Grant kissed her temple. "You gave me just as much. This ranch was just a house before you came. Now it's a home. You brought warmth and life and love to every corner of it. You gave me children and a future worth building. I love you more now than I did the day we married, and I didn't think that was possible." They sat together in comfortable silence as the stars came out. In the distance, a coyote howled, and from the barn came the soft sounds of horses settling for the night. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully, safe and loved. "Thank you," Hannah said quietly. "For what?" "For stopping that day. For offering to help a stranger. For seeing me as more than just a desperate laundress. For making me your wife and giving me this beautiful life." Grant turned her face toward his and kissed her deeply. "The pleasure has been all mine, Mrs. Dawson." Over the next decade, the Dawson Ranch became one of the most respected operations in the area. Grant's fair dealing and quality cattle earned him a solid reputation, while Hannah's involvement in the local church and school made her a valued member of the community. The stigma that had once attached to her living situation as Grant's housekeeper was long forgotten, replaced by respect for the strong, capable woman she'd become. Jimmy grew into a responsible young man who shared his father's love of ranching. At 16, he was already managing some of the cattle operations himself and talking about expanding into horse breeding. Mary developed a talent for numbers and helped her mother keep the ranch accounts, her neat figures filling ledger after ledger. Young Tom was only 10 but showed promise as a natural horseman, fearless in the saddle and gentle with even the most skittish animals. In 1894, the family faced their first major crisis when a severe drought hit the region. Water sources dried up, and grass turned brown and brittle. Grant had to make the difficult decision to sell off some of their herd before the cattle starved. It was a hard summer, with everyone working from dawn to dusk to keep the remaining animals alive. But they survived, as they always did, by working together. Hannah stretched every penny and every food resource. The children helped without complaint, even young Tom carrying water buckets until his arms ached. When the fall rains finally came, they all stood in the downpour with their faces turned to the sky, laughing and crying with relief. The drought brought the community together in unexpected ways. Neighbors helped neighbors, sharing water and resources. The Dawsons took in a family whose well had gone completely dry, housing them for 2 months until the rains came. Those bonds forged in hardship would last for years. By the turn of the century, the Dawson children were nearly grown. Jimmy was 21 and courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a sweet girl named Alice, who Hannah adored. Mary was 19 and had been offered a position teaching at the school in Carlin, which she'd accepted with her parents' blessing. Tom, at 16, was still deciding his future, but leaned toward staying on the ranch with his father. Grant was 46 now, his sandy hair touched with gray at the temples, but he was still strong and vital. Hannah, at 44, had laugh lines around her eyes and silver streaking her dark hair, but Grant still told her she was beautiful every single day. One evening in March 1900, they sat on their porch watching the sunset, just as they had so many times before. 22 years of marriage had only deepened their love and understanding of each other. Jimmy asked Alice to marry him, Grant said. He wanted my blessing first, which I gave. Hannah smiled. I knew it was coming. He's been saving up to buy that piece of land adjacent to ours. He wants to start his own ranch but stay close. Like father, like son, Grant said with pride. And Mary's been offered a higher salary to teach in Carson City, but she's turned it down. Says she wants to stay near family. We raised good children, Hannah said softly. We did, Grant agreed. They're kind and hardworking and honest. They know the value of family and home. Hannah leaned her head on Grant's shoulder. Do you remember what you said to me before we married? That you'd work every day to make me happy. I remember. You've kept that promise, Grant. Every single day for 22 years, you've made me happy. I want you to know that. Grant's arm tightened around her. And you've given me everything I never knew I needed. A real home, children to carry on after us, a partner who challenges me and supports me and loves me. I look at our life together and I'm in awe of what we've built. They watched the sun sink below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Inside the house, they could hear Mary practicing the piano while Tom did his evening chores. From the barn came the sounds of the horses and cattle settling for the night. Everything was exactly as it should be. Jimmy and Alice married that June in a beautiful ceremony at the Methodist church. The whole community turned out to celebrate, and Hannah cried happy tears as her oldest child pledged his life to the woman he loved. She and Grant hosted the reception at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and music and dancing that lasted until well after dark. Watching Jimmy and Alice dance together, Hannah remembered her own wedding day. How nervous she'd been, how uncertain about the future. But she'd taken a leap of faith with Grant, and it had led to a lifetime of love and happiness. As if reading her thoughts, Grant appeared at her side and extended his hand. "Dance with me, Mrs. Dawson." Hannah took his hand and let him lead her to the makeshift dance floor. They swayed together to the music, surrounded by family and friends and the life they'd built together. "What are you thinking about?" Grant asked. "About that scared girl who said yes to a cowboy's proposal after knowing him only a few weeks. About how that decision changed everything." "Any regrets?" Grant asked with a smile, knowing the answer. "Not a single one," Hannah said, echoing her words from years ago. "You're still the best decision I ever made." Grant kissed her there in front of everyone, a sweet, tender kiss that promised many more years together. Around them, people cheered and clapped, but Hannah barely heard them. All she could focus on was Grant, her husband, her partner, her home. The years continued to pass in a gentle rhythm of seasons and celebrations. Jimmy and Alice had 3 children, making Grant and Hannah grandparents. Mary eventually did marry, choosing a banker from Carlin named Robert who treated her like a queen. Tom took over more and more of the ranch operations as Grant gradually slowed down, though the older man still rode out most mornings to check on the cattle. In 1910, Grant and Hannah celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a large party at the ranch. Their children and grandchildren gathered, along with friends they'd accumulated over the decades. Tommy, now retired from ranch work but still living in a small house on the property, gave a touching speech about how he'd watched their love grow over the years. "I was just a kid when the boss brought Miss Hannah home," Tommy said, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought she was the prettiest thing I'd ever seen, and I was right about that. But what I didn't know then was how much love 2 people could build together. I've watched these 2 for 30 years, and they still look at each other like newlyweds. That's the kind of love we should all aspire to." Hannah squeezed Grant's hand under the table, her eyes wet with happy tears. They'd come so far from that dusty afternoon in Carlin when a bullet had brought them together. Every challenge they'd faced, they'd overcome together. Every joy had been doubled because they'd shared it. Their love had created a family, built a legacy, and provided a foundation that would last for generations. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Grant and Hannah stood on their porch, waving goodbye. The ranch stretched out before them, prosperous and peaceful. Their children and grandchildren called out final goodbyes, promising to visit soon. When everyone was gone and the house was quiet, Grant pulled Hannah into his arms. 30 years, he marveled. Feels like both a lifetime and no time at all. "I know what you mean," Hannah said. "Sometimes I can hardly remember life before you. It's like everything before the ranch was just a prelude to the real story." "Our story," Grant said. "And it's not over yet. We've got plenty of years left to write new chapters." Hannah smiled up at him. "I look forward to every one of them." They went inside to clean up from the party, working side by side as they had for 3 decades. Their movements were synchronized, each knowing without words what the other needed. It was the kind of partnership that only came from years of practice and deep, abiding love. Later, lying in bed with Grant's arms around her, Hannah reflected on the unlikely path that had brought her to this moment. A stray bullet, a kind stranger, a desperate gamble on an uncertain future. Any of those things could have gone differently, and her life would have been completely changed. But they hadn't. The bullet had only grazed her. Grant had been exactly who he'd seemed to be, and the gamble had paid off in ways she could never have imagined. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Grant murmured sleepily. "For everything. For stopping that day. For seeing me. For loving me. For building this life with me." Grant's arms tightened around her. "Best decision I ever made was offering you that job. Second best was convincing you to marry me." "It didn't take much convincing," Hannah admitted with a soft laugh. Because you're smart enough to recognize a good thing when you see it, Grant teased. They drifted off to sleep together, just as they had for 30 years, just as they would for many more to come. The Dawson Ranch continued to thrive through the 1910s and into the 1920s. Grant and Hannah gradually handed over more responsibility to their children and focused on enjoying their grandchildren and each other. They took trips they'd never had time for before, visiting San Francisco and seeing the ocean for the first time. They attended their grandchildren's school plays and birthday parties, becoming beloved fixtures in their growing family. In 1925, Grant and Hannah celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary quietly, just the two of them on their porch watching another sunset. They were in their 70s now, slowed by age but still sharp and engaged with life. 45 years, Hannah mused. When I think about that girl in the boarding house, I can hardly believe it's been so long. You're still that girl to me, Grant said, beautiful and brave and full of life. You're a terrible liar, Hannah said fondly, but I love you for it. I'm not lying. You're still the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. More so now because of all the years we've shared, all the memories we've made. Hannah leaned against him, comfortable and content. I never thanked you properly, you know. For what? For giving me a home when I needed one, not just a house or a job, but a real home, a place to belong, a family, a future. Everything I'd been searching for my whole life without even knowing it. Grant kissed the top of her head. You gave me the exact same thing, Hannah. Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. You brought color and warmth and meaning to my life. You made everything worth doing. They sat together as the stars came out, their hands clasped, their hearts full. Inside the house that they'd filled with love and laughter, their legacy lived on in photographs and memories, and the solid foundation they'd built for future generations. Hannah thought about that long-ago day one more time. The heat and dust of Carlin, the pain of the bullet wound, the terror of uncertainty. And then Grant's voice, calm and steady. Let me see that wound. Such simple words, but they'd changed the course of her entire life. She'd been a laundress working to survive with no prospects and no hope. And a cowboy had offered her a home instead. Not just a physical place to live, but a home in every sense of the word. A partnership, a family, a love that had sustained her through decades and would continue until her last breath. I love you, she said, the words as true now as they'd been the night she'd first spoken them 45 years ago. I love you too, Grant replied. Always have, always will. And under the vast Nevada sky, on the porch of the home they'd built together, the former laundress and the cowboy who'd saved her held each other close and watched the stars come out. Their love story complete and perfect in every way.